Khomeini, the leader of Iran, did say that this is essentially an attack on Iranian soil. So Israel has responded initially just with comments from the foreign minister. We've seen Israel Katz tweeting on X. He said, if Iran attacks from its territory, Israel will respond and attack Iran. He wrote that in both Farsi and Hebrew.
The US President Joe Biden has reiterated America's ironclad support for Israel's right to defend itself following threats from Iran. Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei said Israel must be punished, but Israel's foreign minister has warned of retaliation. Hamas's political leader also announced his 3 sons were killed by an Israeli airstrike, which the IDF has confirmed. There's a video circulating online where you see him finding out the news. He seemingly remains completely calm and carries on with his meeting. But you do have to wonder what's going on. Gabrielle Weiniger is the Times correspondent in Israel and joins us now. Gabrielle, good morning.
Good morning, Callum.
Shall we start, first of all, with President Biden and the warnings that Iran is threatening to launch a significant attack, is the quote, after the strike on the Iranian consulate in Syria. What more do we understand about the extent, the level of this warning?
Well, we've seen a US intelligence report that was first reported on Bloomberg, warning of a major either missile or precision drone strike by Iran or one of its proxies against both military and government targets in Israel. That report was saying it's imminent, meaning that's going to happen in the coming days. As you mentioned, it's all in response to the Israeli attack on an Iranian consulate, which is also considered to be some kind of a Revolutionary Guards headquarters in the Syrian capital of Damascus. But that was the first of its kind. And Khomeini, the leader of Iran, did say that this is essentially an attack on Iranian soil. So Israel has responded initially just with comments from the foreign minister. We've seen Israel Katz tweeting on X. He said, if Iran attacks from its territory, Israel will respond and attack Iran. He wrote that in both Farsi and Hebrew. What we know from the ground is that since April the 1st, Israel's been bolstering its defenses and been on high alert for this precision drone strike. They've called up their entire aerial reservists from the army who are on leave. So all that unit is mobilized. Their embassies abroad are also on high alert. And something that I've just been noticing on the ground from Israeli citizens themselves, they're not really traveling at the moment to places like Dubai and especially Turkey. So there's really what they're looking out for is attack directly from Iran or from its proxies. Hezbollah on the northern border from Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, who have been performing and conducting attacks on the Red Sea and disrupting the sea route there. All of this, of course, kicking off since October the 7th, and the US vowing to stand behind Israel. We do know that Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke last night. And Blinken reiterated his support and said that the US stands with Israel against any threat by Iran on its proxies. What we can say for sure is any strike on Israel would certainly widen the conflict and draw in the US and Iran and all its offshoots.
I note that Israel hasn't claimed responsibility for the strike on the consulate, although consensus is that is what's happened. And I just wonder, Gabrielle, if Israel would do that without pricing in the potential consequences of an attack like that.
It's difficult to say. They haven't claimed it, but there has been allusions to it, and I think we're past the point where we can say alleged Israeli strike. Everybody knows that it was an Israeli strike, and you suppose that they would take that into account. They did kill 2 senior commanders and 5 other members of the IRGC. You would think that they were taking the regional consequences, and maybe they did. Maybe they did.
In terms then of other developments in the area, let's discuss the killing of, the 3 sons of Hamas's political leader in an Israeli strike yesterday. I suppose there's 2 things on this. 1, what happened? And 2, what impact will this have particularly on negotiations? Could Hamas derail negotiations as a result of the incident?
Well, this is another one where you would ask, has Israel considered the implications of such a strike? And in this case, Israel has confirmed that they assassinated three of Ismail Haniyeh's sons. He's the head of the political bureau of Hamas. He is currently in exile in Qatar. The army say that his three sons were on the way to commit some kind of a terror act. We've also seen unconfirmed reports, at least by the army, but sources on the ground in Gaza saying that three of his grandchildren, excuse me, were also killed in this attack. They were all in a car that Israel targeted. They were driving to celebrate, to families, to relatives, to celebrate Eid, which is, of course, the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. But this isn't such an unusual thing for Ismail Haniyeh. 60 members of his family have been killed since the start of the war in October, including his brother, who was killed in the early days of the war. His sister, who lives in southern Israel, was also arrested earlier this month for collaborating with Hamas. Haniyeh has insisted that this will not interfere with the ongoing negotiations that are being brokered by the US and Egypt and Qatar. But I think the wider fear is that this will throw off the talks. They're currently in the stage where they're waiting for Hamas to respond to the latest proposal. So I suppose we'll see in this Hamas response whether or not this is going to affect the negotiations or just increase the potential for escalation, which, it seems that this is the way it's heading.
Yeah. In terms of what it does also, I was reading your article in the World section of the Times today about tensions between Israel and the US as well, given President Biden's sort of stern words for Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel over the last, week to 10 days or so, I suppose now. This idea of some sort of humanitarian truce, this idea that civilians need to be prioritised in Gaza, sort of a sense of growing frustration from Biden aimed at Netanyahu. And I just wonder if this strike feeds into that conversation as well.
I think it would. I think that Biden would say that this has potentially thrown off negotiations. And we've heard, increased criticism of Netanyahu. And he said some of his harshest things yet the other day, I think it was yesterday, actually. He said, Israel's making a huge mistake in Gaza, and he just doesn't agree with Netanyahu's approach. I think the peak of these deteriorating relations was the killing of the 7 World Central Kitchen aid workers, where Biden then told Netanyahu to change course and allow more humanitarian assistance into Gaza. It's not clear if that's happening. The UN and Israel give very, very different reports when it comes to how much aid is currently entering into Gaza. And we do know that some of the pledges that Israel's made, for example, opening the Erez crossing and the Ashdod port to allow in more flour, it hasn't happened yet. And I spoke to the Israeli officials yesterday who are in charge of these things, and they don't have a date for it. And actually, I know that Erez crossing is still in tatters from the October 7th attack, and there's no plans to refurbish it. So it's not really clear whether or not that's going to happen, and there's going to be more aid coming in. There's also the fallout over the potential Rafah operation, with the US saying they have no knowledge of it happening soon, but Benjamin Netanyahu saying we have a date. So there's all these points of tension and disagreements. But what could happen is that this situation with Iran and US President Joe Biden vowing to stand behind Israel, they could push those allies closer together, because Netanyahu has always insisted throughout his decades in leadership that Iran is the biggest threat.
Let's get some analysis from Steve Erlanger. He's the New York Times chief diplomatic correspondent for Europe. Morning, Steve.
Good morning.
Good to speak to you. I mean, there has been a notable change in tone and message from President Biden over the last sort of 10 days or so. Is he swinging back and forth, though? Is he getting it right?
Well, it's hard to know if he's getting it right, of course. That would be in the pudding. But he has influenced Netanyahu significantly in 2 ways. One, to let more aid into Gaza, and 2, in these negotiations over a ceasefire, the Americans have actually put forward their own proposal, which is unusual. Hamas has been rejecting it, but is considering it. Biden very much wants at least this 6-week ceasefire to get more aid into Gaza. Hamas now says that under its old rules, which would mean producing 40 live hostages of a certain category. I don't think there are 40 live hostages in that category. So Biden's a bit frustrated, but on Iran, he's been very clear. I mean, he has always supported Israel's right to exist, Israel's right to defend itself, and Iran is a big country. It's not Hamas. And so I think it was a very important message that he was sending to Iran, which is to be careful not just about what it does for retaliation against Israel, but against US troops who are in the region as well.
In terms of the potential for escalation here, then, with Israel and Iran, we had the strike on the consulate in Damascus a few days ago by Israel. It strikes me that they wouldn't do that without factoring in something of a, in inverted commas, cost of doing business, something of a response from Iran. Would there ever be direct hits one on the other, or is it always on the kind of fringes of escalation, I suppose?
Well, that's been the deal so far, which is the fringes. Now, this building that was hit in Damascus, the Israelis say wasn't the consulate, was a building next to the embassy. The Iranians say, no, it was part of our embassy, so it was our territory. So that changed the equation for the Iranians. Now, they're in a bit of a bind because they vowed from top down, the supreme leader down, to retaliate, but they need to retaliate in a way that doesn't provoke a much larger escalation or a direct Israel-Iran war. I mean, I don't think either side wants it. Iran certainly doesn't want it either. So we'll see what they end up doing. I think they've said, we'll take our time, we'll think about it. In the meantime, they have Israel all in a panic, which is kind of part of, a sensible procedure for them. But yeah, the risks of regional escalation are bigger. I mean, something could go wrong. There could be miscalculation. Something could land in the wrong place. It could, a missile could hit a kindergarten, and then who the hell knows what would happen.
Yeah. What do you make of Joe Biden's domestic situation as well, politically speaking, I mean? The House Speaker, the House of Representatives Speaker, Republican Mike Johnson, said, shamefully, since October the 7th, Joe Biden has transformed into an anti-Israel president. There's really no other way to characterize it. I wonder if you think, first of all, if that's fair, and second of all, if there's a shift here or something to consider here, which is it's possible to be anti-Netanyahu but pro-Israel, and is that the line that Biden's trying to walk?
Well, I do think it is unfair. I mean, Joe Biden is probably the most pro-Israel president ever. And so and he has gone out of his way politically to defend Israel when the entire world has been criticizing its operation of the war inside Gaza. Now, Biden feels that too. He's very angry with Netanyahu, who's quite stubborn. And he has been pushing, as I say, for more humanitarian aid and for this ceasefire. And I think he's making some progress, but outside in the party, it feels differently. I mean, the Democratic Party on the left of the party is basically very angry at Israel and feels pro-Palestinian. And then he has Arab American constituents in key states like Michigan who are understandably upset with him and his policies. But, we're in an election campaign and Trump is hovering, and Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, is trying himself to balance his loyalty to Trump and his loyalty to, call it real politics.